Chapter 8. Professor 3. The basement of the tower. The disciplinary committee's meeting place felt so cold as if it were gnawing at one's flesh. In this place where the discipline of the university magic tower was exercised, a total of 7 members in charge of said disciplinary actions of the magicians gathered, and the subject of disciplinary actions would sit on the other side of the invisible glass, waiting for their punishment. Why did these two fight? I don't know yet. Quote, the first seat, that is, the highest seat, belonged to the board chairman, and I could see 2 people through the glass from the second seat next to it. Why don't you know? I don't know because I didn't ask. Quote, oh, right. Quote, Eiferin, who was brought to the disciplinary committee, just bowed her head and wiggled her fingers. Sylvia, on the other hand, seemed rather confident and calm. This situation was entirely caused by the fight between these two. However, Sylvia was the heir to the Iliad family, and Eiferin was just a fallen noble with nothing to her name, so it wasn't hard to see what the disciplinary committee would do. Chairman, Senior Professor de Culane. You're already here. Quote, the door opened and the other disciplinary committee members arrived one after the other. The fat male professor with a sly smile on his lips was Leline from the support department. I can't believe this happened in the first class. I'm very sorry, Professor de Culane. Quote, the skinny man with his head down is Professor Latran of the spirit department, and the silent one in the robe was probably Professor Fesley in charge of the dormitory, and the rest. A total of 7 were gathered here. Really now? Some strange girl dared to touch the Rookie Magician of the Year. As soon as Leline sat down on the chair, he stared at Eiferin. Latran had a similar look in his eyes. Quite right. Apparently, she didn't even go through the academy. Quote, fortunately, these words didn't reach Eiferin. Although we could see Eiferin, she couldn't see us. Still, I heard that Senior Professor de Culane did a good job handling this situation. Quote, Leline looked at me with furtive eyes. I didn't have the energy to respond to that flattering remark. It's not that I don't want to answer, I was just exhausted. Even now, I was barely holding on with my willpower. I used up all my mana, even squeezing more out than that, to stop that situation. The professor in charge would be in trouble if someone got hurt because of his negligence. That's right, Tilda. It seems like I underestimated our Professor de Culane a bit. Still, Professor de Culane is a magician of the monarch rank. A debutante wouldn't be able to beat someone like him even if there were 100 of them. You are absolutely right. The board chairman and Leline chatted as such. I stared at Eiferin without saying a word. Naturally, my brows were furrowed. Even so, Professor de Culane. Don't be too angry. I shall figure something out. Quote, Leline seemed to have misunderstood my expression as anger, but that's not what it meant. A strange air was rising from the cowering Eiferin. A thin, ominous gas that spreaded like water vapor. I frowned to get a closer look at this strange phenomenon. If my guess is right, then that was the visual manifestation of another trait, fate of a villain, that was only visible to me due to the trait vision. Fate of a villain. Rating. Description. The fate of a villain. The whole world wants him dead. However, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. The whole world wants me dead. The predestination of her murder, that is, the death flag, that Eiferin would one day kill me, was now clearly revealed to me by vision. So Tilda, now that we're all here, let's start the disciplinary committee meeting regarding debutante magician Eiferin and Sylvia. No. How dare you fight inside the classroom? With magic, no less. If it weren't for Senior Professor de Culane, people would have gotten hurt, you ignorant fools. The disciplinary committee was fierce from the start. One could only see silhouettes through the glass, but Eiferin knew that shape and voice. Professor Leline. In yesterday's class he seemed like a very kind professor, but right now, as he was angry, he seemed very scary. So, what was the reason for your fight? Leline asked. Eiferin glanced at Sylvia next to her. That bitch swore my father out. No, didn't I swear at her more? It wasn't such a rude insult. But whatever it was, she couldn't say anything because Diculane was right next to Leline. In fact, even if he weren't there, I wouldn't say anything. The thing about her father. She didn't want to talk with anyone about that. Even more so as an excuse to avoid disciplinary actions. I can't tell you. Quote, what? Are you joking with me right now? Professor Leline's face was distorted. No. It's just. Then tell me, why did you fight? Was it because you felt inferior? Ifrin kept her mouth shut and bowed her head. Leline, who was wheezing, now looked at Sylvia next to her. Sylvia, then you give us an answer. During class, I accidentally destroyed this girl's results. That led to an argument. Quote, what? You created this situation for that reason. Isn't it fully that ignorant fool's fault then? Hey, do you have anger control issues? I don't even remember your name. Ifrin clenched her fists. She had the taste of blood spreading in her mouth. It might have come from her lips, which she bit too hard. Is that so? Well, I think it has almost been decided. Professor Diculane, don't you have anything to say about this, Tilda? It was your class. The chairman called the name of the person she hated the most, Diculane. She could feel Diculane's gaze penetrating through the glass. Ifrin's heart pounded heavily. Whether he knew her or not, she had no other choice but to resign herself now. Diculane, as a senior professor and the tower's disciplinary committee member. She felt like her whole body was falling into a deep, dark well. The agony of drowning alive. Shall ask Sylvia a question. However, it was strange. For some reason, the subject of the interrogation seemed to be Sylvia, not her. What was your fault in this situation? Quote question mark quote. Ifrin, who was sinking to the bottom, quickly raised her head and blinked. Flustered, Sylvia licked her lips. I shall ask again. In that situation, did you really do nothing wrong? It was an unexpected development. A number of questions filled Ifrin's head. I was sure Diculane was going to attack me though. Why is he questioning Sylvia all of a sudden? Oh, no way. He's doing it as a Eucline, not as Diculane, to keep the Iliad family's heir in check. But why? Anyone can see that this is my fault, right? Sylvia. I'm sure you were capable of preventing this situation. Diculane's unique, cool, straight voice sounded. However, you did not. Did you wait for someone to get hurt because of the magic explosion? A small crack appeared on Sylvia's blank expression. That mask she wore from the start of the meeting, which seemed like a thick sheet of ice, was slowly breaking. Or was that the extent of your abilities everyone was looking forward to? Cracks, once formed, quickly led to destruction. She lowered her head to hide her slightly biting her lips. I'm sorry. I could have prevented it, but didn't. It was my malice-wishing magician Ifrin's fault to grow bigger. Quote, then, she just obediently accepted her mistake. A stupid sound dropped out of Ifrin's mouth. The situation I was barely able to understand has become chaotic again. What's with her? I could have prevented it, but didn't. However, Senior Professor Diculane. It wouldn't be her fault for defending against that attack, now would it? Whoever attacked first is at fault. Professor Leline urgently stepped in. Then Diculane tilted his head and glanced at him. If you want to use a narrative like that, then wouldn't this situation be my fault as I organized the lecture, in the first place? Professor Leline, do you want to blame me? What? No. I don't think so. Be clear. The firm, eloquent voice reverberated throughout the interrogation room. Ifrin and Sylvia swallowed their saliva without realizing. Talk. Leline, frightened, clacked his teeth a few times, then fumbled before he shook his head. No way. It was just that unsavory. I set up the environment for the purpose of the lecture. I have not given any direction as to what to do in it as well. So even if there was a quarrel, one could see it as part of the class content. It was just sophistry. However, the faculty, crushed by Diculane's prestige, did not dare to refute. The chairman, the only one who would have been able to fight back, was just sitting back and seemed like she was enjoying the show. Therefore, the word, unsavory, might as well be an insult to my class, but I have to admit that it has led to a dangerous situation. At that point, no matter how hard she thought, no matter how much she wanted to deny it, no matter how hard she tried to understand it, Ifrin couldn't help but admit it. Dick Elaine was. No, that Dick Elaine was defending her. However, if we take out the risk from magic, what would remain of it? Besides, they are just debutantes of the tower. Whether Dick Elaine knows my father or not, I was sure that I'd get expelled. The Dick Elaine I know would certainly have pushed for that. Ifrin looked at him, feeling that she couldn't understand him. Rather than trying to cover up meaningless errors and wrongdoings, and killing their spirit by threatening them, I believe 'tis the duty of a great magician to teach the depth of experience, so that they can experience these kinds of situations inside the tower, so that they can maintain their dignity outside. What do you think, Professor Leline? Ego tilde. Ego. Of course, you're absolutely right. As expected of Senior Professor Dick Elaine. With but only a few simple words I have been completely persuaded tilde. You are right. The professors agreed. If Dick Elaine was that proactive, everyone couldn't help but agree with him. Even if Dick Elaine wasn't a professor, he'd still be the esteemed Count Eucline, but they were nothing but professors. Clap, clap, clap. The sound of applause that didn't fit the situation at all filled the interrogation room. Anyone who'd seen this would think they held a concert here. Tilde that sounds good. I, too, still remember the old days. I almost got suspended by a professor back then as well. The board chairman also smiled and nodded. So, what are you guys doing? Aren't you going to go back? Yes, the bewildered Ifrin asked, without knowing who the other party was. What do you mean, yes tilde? You heard everything, right? There will be no disciplinary actions taken. Kids like you grow by fighting after all tilde. But there won't be a next time. Hearing that, Sylvia jumped out of her seat. She left without looking back. However, Ifrin didn't do that. She just blankly stared through the window. Now, let us go as well. I thought it would be a waste of time, but I was glad to know that Professor Dick Elaine cared so much for the new magicians. Before the frozen Ifrin, the professors of the disciplinary committee stood up. They left one by one. Ifrin, who had just been sitting there, watching, soon came to her senses and shouted loudly. The other professors just glanced at her, but there was only one silhouette. Only the person presumed to be Dick Elaine looked at her. Then Ifrin told him. There's something I want to tell you. Ha! A faint laugh that seemed almost inaudible. It was extremely attractive, although it shouldn't be perceived as attractive. At that time, it was you in that lecture hall. Ifrin shuddered at these words. She immediately got cold feet. It felt like her lips were going to dry up. However, she followed through without much hesitation. There's something I want to ask. Quote, the thing Ifrin wanted to ask. Do you remember the last name Luna? Do you know my father? Do you know the man who took his own life 3 years ago? But, if she were to ask that, he'd probably ignore her as well. As Ifrin was hesitating again like this, Dick Elaine just cut the conversation off. You don't need to ask. At that moment, Ifrin came back to her senses. It was as if icicles fell down on top of her head. You're talented, so don't waste your talents as you please. He left these words behind. She couldn't catch him this time. Quote ellipsis quote. She was left in just an empty interrogation room. In this space, left alone, Ifrin, who was brooding over Dick Elaine's words, was convinced. He knows me. My father. Therefore, this was just simple pity. Just a tiny bit of compassion. He felt some guilt over my father's death, so he helped me. Ifrin felt her heart twist in anger over that matter, and while she was sad and confused about the situation, she wasn't even able to refuse said pity. In the end, she was relieved though. You know. Quote, that's enough. If you know, if you haven't forgotten, that's enough for now. Hup. After wiping away the tears from the corners of her eyes, and vigorously wiping the tip of her red nose, Ifrin left the interrogation room. Ellipsis. Meanwhile, turning around, Diculane swallowed a sigh of relief. Destiny of a villain, overcoming death flags. Store currency +2. I successfully broke a death flag and obtained store currency. As expected, it was the right choice to side with Ifrin. Of course, there was an unintentional twist to this. Sylvia might hold a grudge against her over this incident after all. I was going to come out with that textbook saying, "You're wrong and she's also wrong, but in broad terms it's nobody's fault," but I didn't think Sylvia would so readily admit to her faults. But what should I've done? I had to put out that fire to my feet then and there. Thanks to that, both of them ended up without any punishment, so it can be said to be a good outcome to some extent. There could have been a better way. Quote, nevertheless, it was still regrettable. It was also because of Diculane's uselessly stubborn personality, and his understanding didn't apply to human relationships at all. However, Diculane soon shook off Kim Woojin's mindset and left the interrogation room. Sylvia was sitting on a bench on the school campus, thinking. Quietly closing her eyes, she rewinded the event 3 hours earlier in her mind. At that time she, clearly, extinguished Ifrin's magic power that had attacked her. But in its place, she planted her own trap magic. She cleverly manipulated her magic to create a vortex as if Ifrin's and her own magic had collided. In fact, it was designed to respond to only Ifrin's magic power. Of course, it wasn't at a level that it would cause casualties, and if it did, she was going to help with the Iliade's financial resources. Therefore, there only should have been one victim. That would have been just Ifrin Luna. He knew. Quote, Diculane, obviously knew. He was already aware of her trick. So instead of saying that it was Sylvia's handiwork, he twisted it and said, Sylvia didn't stop even though she could. Quote, in that instant, Diculane had asked her to comply. It was an unmistakable threat. How? Quote, Sylvia's only question was, how? She could say with confidence that there were no magical observatory recordings of the classroom. They've already been carefully manipulated after she viewed the whole thing. In that case, the absurdity that Diculane had inferred the whole story with just his own insight and intelligence. Beep, beep, the horn broke her line of thoughts. Sylvia looked towards the sound's origin. A car was parked on the side of the road. The window went down and a familiar face appeared. Darling. That's where you were. Quote, he had blonde hair and golden eyes that resembled Sylvia's. The head of a noble magician who had inherited the bloodline of the Iliade family more clearly than anyone else, a high-ranking magician of the Esprit rank, and the proud father of Sylvia. Glithian von Ludwig Iliade. I heard the whole story. Get in. Quote, yes. Quote, Sylvia plopped inside her father's car. If you want to have more videos like this, then like and subscribe to my channel, and have a nice day or evening or night. I will see you soon.